You are listening to the INCJ podcast, Conversations about International Criminal Justice. Hi everybody, welcome to an INCJ broadcast and YouTube on Aphantasia. At INCJ, we want to give people a conversational opportunity to explore a wide range of topics. And this is a first for us, two very different colleagues from the criminal justice world who both have aphantasia. We hope that listeners and watchers will find this interesting and thought-provoking. We're going to pass the lead on different aspects of this topic between us and just see where the ideas take us. If you want to find other discussion items, you can find us at criminaljusticenetwork.net or on Twitter at INTCJ Network. The title of this podcast is Exploring Aphantasia. Thank you very much for joining us and listening. So let me hand over to Jacky Burrows to start our conversation.
Hey, thank you, John. Well, first of all, possibly I should introduce myself a little bit. I'm a senior lecturer in criminology at Sheffield Hallam University. And I guess the pertinent bits of my history beyond that are that my educational practice background are a little bit more around various psychology jobs within the prison system. And I'm also a qualified probation officer. So I've got quite a passion for psychology, and I'm one of those people that's come into criminology a little bit kind of sideways. I'm not an expert in what we're going to talk about. This is very much a kind of speculative chat from two people who kind of have this personal experience and have been reading around it. But I guess the first thing we should probably do is just clarify what aphantasia. I'm not sure we've fully worked that one out yet. Just to explain a little bit about what it is. So I first came across this not through any of my psychology reading or anything else that I've been doing. I actually came across it through the comedian Richard Herring, his podcast and him chatting about it. And I'm also aware it's been discussed in other podcasts by other comedians. So No Such Thing as a Fish. It's also popped up there because some of those people have aphantasia as well. And what we're talking about is essentially having little or no mind's eye, so cannot visualize. And although it's been talked about for quite a while now, it's only really named in 2015. So suddenly there's been this surge of people becoming aware and talking about it. I mention it to other people and they kind of go, oh, yes, or they're kind of, what the hell is that? And what we are talking about is maybe 5%. That's, I think, the kind of upper end of people I've seen affected, but maybe like 1% of people who are really, really fully mind blind. And if people want to think about that, maybe one of the things you can do is just try to visualize the face of someone that is close to you, or maybe their whole body. Kind of think about the detail you've got there, the sharpness of the image, the color, whether you can imagine them moving. If you've got their full body, can you imagine them walking and so on? And I know that when I try and do those things, I have got virtually nothing. So it's not entirely nothing, but it's pretty much that there is nothing in my head. So even for people I'm ultra familiar with, really close to, I've got virtually nothing in my head. And if I shut my eyes, it's even worse. Some people say do that to try and help you. And if I shut my eyes, I've just got nothing but, those swirly patterns that we tend to get. And when I talk about this to other people, that's often the thing that seems to trouble them most, that idea that I can't even visualize people that I'm close to. So obviously, I've been thinking about this a lot. And like I often do, anytime I come across something interesting, I start thinking about the implications for the criminal justice system, potentially. That's what happens a lot with things that I find interesting. I've also been thinking about myself a lot and what it means for me. So lots of thinking. That's where I always go, because a kind of curious kind of person, arguably over-reflective sometimes. But I've been thinking about that a lot. And I also wrote an article for Probation Quarterly, which is how, John, I understand you first came across me. So I kind of just speculated a little bit about what the implications might be for criminal justice in that, or just kind of making people aware of it, thinking about the assumptions we sometimes make about people's inner worlds. you came across that. Do you want to just say a little bit about how you
Okay.
got in touch?
So I ought to say who I am.
Yeah.
My name's John Scott. My background is that I was a probation officer, and I ended up eventually in the Home Office as head of public protection, and did a variety of senior civil service jobs before I then became a consultant on things like international justice reform and human rights. I did not find out that I had aphantasia, so I even pronounce it differently to Jacky. So although we're similar, we're very different, everybody. So just sort of make a note of that. Until I was 64. So presumably people who know me always thought I was a bit unusual. So this might be an explanation. But I didn't find out about this until much later on in life. And a friend of mine said, "Oh, there's this article you must read." And so I contacted Jacky direct with an email saying, "I think we've got something in common. Sort of, shall we meet and chat?" And in exchanging emails and then having 2 or 3 Zooms, we thought, well, our conversation is really both fun and of real interest to us. Perhaps if we have this conversation in a more public setting, other people would also find it interesting. I'm wondering if so you found out about it just by reading some comedian stuff?
It was one of his podcasts. Yeah, he interviews different guests. But he mentioned it because he had it. And it seems to me a lot of people are finding out about it, certainly initially, through sort of less formal channels, although there are obviously a lot more kind of more formal things, the BBC doing things covering it now.
Well, I found out that I was different to other people when I was asked to lead a series of meditations at church. And I read English at university, and I always thought the concept of the mind's eye was just a lovely image, a metaphor. Because when I'm probably more extreme than Jacky. I have absolutely zero ability to visualize. So whether with my eyes open or my eyes closed, I just see black. The swirly stuff, yes, but complete black. And I do not dream visually either. So I do not think in pictures. I think only in ideas.
So how did that go for your enjoyment of reading, therefore, with your degree and so on? I know that I get really frustrated if something's got pages with a visual description. I'm like, get to where something happens, somebody say something, something.
Okay. Well, I read it and used the language. I was interested in imagery. I was interested in the pictures that people were trying to draw. I was interested in the connectivity and the structure. So I enjoyed the skill of the writer, but I wasn't trying to create a film in my head. So I've got a really good friend who, as he reads a novel, like creates a film. So he's sort of like creating visual sequences as he reads a novel. Now, I wasn't doing that. So I'll give you an example. You hear people go to see a film and they say, "Oh, I hate the film that's based on a book because it wasn't as I imagined it. It spoiled the book for me." And I thought, well, that's stupid. It's just somebody's version of the film. But I didn't have any pictures in my head. So the film couldn't spoil the book. And I'll give you another example of something that shocked me. You know how people say, well, just count sheep and you'll go to sleep. Well, because I couldn't imagine sheep jumping over a fence or through a hole in the wall or something. Well, that was a stupid way to try to get to sleep, because I couldn't create pictures in my head, so I couldn't get to sleep that way. So even though I knew these ideas and other people, but I never actually thought that I was different to anybody else until, as I say, in my 60s, I was asked to lead a series of different types of meditation. And there were some meditations that I could do very easily as an intellectual discipline. But of course, visualization as a form of recreation, as a meditation, form of meditation, I could not do. So I thought, well, I better read up about this if I've got to lead a meditation exercise based on this. And it was like a really shocking self-revelation that 99% of the rest of the population genuinely could recreate pictures in their head. So I'll give you a shot. If I close my eyes, I cannot see a picture of my wife or my children. I can't recreate that in my head. And people are really shocked when you say that to them, but I just don't have that ability. And in my reading as part of this discovery, and I recommend if people want to find out more about what it's like to have aphantasia, there's a bloke called Blake Ross, who's the co-founder of Mozilla Firefox. And he found out that he'd got aphantasia in his young 30s and has done a fantastic Facebook entry on this. It's like an article. And it blew his mind that other people could visualize. And you who are phantasic take it for granted. So enjoy the skill is what I would say. So that's how I found out about it, Jacky. And because we made this connection, we've found similarities and differences, haven't we? And it has had an impact on our lives, I suspect.
Can I ask you what your reaction was? Because mine was first like full on curiosity. I need to reflect over my entire life and work out what impact this has had. Partly also feeling a little bit stupid that I hadn't realised earlier, but also I kind of experienced a little bit of a sense of loss, I think, and jealousy of other people. What was your reaction?
Well, I wasn't. I was surprised because you tend to assume that the way your brain works is the way everybody else's brain works. And that's a bit of a shock because, of course, I knew that isn't true. I have two extremely dyslexic sons, for example. So I know that putting sequence together in people's brains, can be messed up. So I know about that not everybody's brain works the same way. And hey, presto, one of my two sons is also aphantasic. So, and we did some rapid testing to see if any of my grandchildren are, if either of my parents are. So we looked really quickly, and only one of my blood relatives looks as if they are aphantasic, and that's my older son. So we did checked out to see if any of my friends had this experience, and none of them do. But I wasn't, because it hasn't seemed to be a disadvantage to me. So give you an example, Jacky, I was always described as the ideas guy. And of course, I think I've developed alternative ways of learning, alternative ways of thinking, and I've never been blocked. So if there was a problem, I was the sort of person that was used in the group to think, well, come up with an alternative. And I guess that, so for example, some aphasics are awful at directions or getting, but I'm quite good at maps. I'm quite good at getting myself out of a problem. So it is strange, and I don't know how that is, but it looks like my brain found alternative ways to handle problems. And say, for example, you said about reading, I read English at university, and I love books, I love novels, I love poetry, I love imagery, but I don't recreate pictures in my head. I think I enjoyed the ideas in books, and I also enjoyed the word pictures because actually they compensated for that. I couldn't see the picture in my head. I enjoyed the skill and the recreation that the author was conjuring up. I like that.
I have a similar thing. I like ideas being conveyed to me neatly. I like use of language. I enjoy words, but it is very much that I am enjoying the words and no visual. Yeah.
But funny enough, in poetry, which you could say is the densest, most intimate form of capturing ideas and feelings, some I think that intensity I perhaps enjoyed even more than maybe the word picture film, rolling film of a novel. I enjoyed poetry as well for that reason. So it could be that you find a way around a particular way that your brain works. And as I say, the first 64 years of my life, I hadn't got a label for this, and I didn't know that other people weren't the same. What I did know, I'll just give you this as a sort of a lay example. I do a lot of sport, and I'm pretty good at sport. I could turn my hand to pretty well everything. And coaches would say, visualize this. And I couldn't. So the fact that they would often talk about think your way through this, see it in your head. And I thought that was, and I would use it do it as an intellectual exercise, break some sporting activity down into steps, and I could do that. But I couldn't visualize it. So I instead had I took the idea of muscle memory. So doing lots of practice. And so you got it into your muscles rather than into your pictures. So I would see things as muscle memory rather than pictures in your head.
I used to do something a bit similar, I think. So obviously, yes, if I could physically practice, yes, but I used to do mental rehearsals that were more like trying to imagine my body doing something. I couldn't see it either. And I really struggle when saying, where do you imagine yourself in the next 5 years? Probably try to see it. No, no, I can't do that. There seem to be people talking about the potential for different sorts of aphantasia and links between other neurodiversity and that kind of thing at the moment. And I did wonder if some of the things you've talked about are kind of potentially related to that. You said you're quite good at directions, for example, and so on. And I know the way my memory works with this is I have no visual memories of anything, but I kind of have a vague spatial awareness in my memory of things that have happened, a vague experiential awareness of things that have happened, and kind of whatever facts I can store at the time it's happening, I will retain that. But I kind of find that my memory is substantially impacted, but in kind of quite specific ways. But it does, I feel like I've got very little memory of my life because of this, because I can't visually recall anything. How is it for you?
Right. That's again, quite hard to answer. I said, I think in ideas. I think I remember in experiences. So I put together, because I can't see a picture, I put together feelings, happenings, who said what, where we were. So I don't see a flash of a picture. I build up an experience. And I think people ask me, well, I mean, because I do dream, but I think I dream experiences and places, but not the picture of the place. A sense of place rather than a picture of the place. So I think that's the compensation. So I get a lot of information. It's a bit like, for example, in a novel, you get a lot of information on the page, but only in children's books you get a picture of it. So I get a lot of information about an experience, and that's what I remember, Jacky, I think. So if I'm so people say, gosh, you remember a lot about that. Because I suspect that if you have a visual memory, then that's so strong, then that's what you hold on to. But I don't have that. So I've had to work to remember other things. I think that's how I get through it.
I find it really difficult. It's one of the things that has particularly interested me about me and my life. And I do kind of, I take a lot of photos now, especially now that's easy. Obviously, much easier than it was when I was younger. I take a lot of photos, but I also have kind of been reflecting on my slight obsession with lists. And I think it's because I feel like my life hasn't really happened unless I'm photographing it or ticking off things on a list. Like I love hill walking, mountaineering, that kind of thing. But I have to have photographic evidence or a specific list of mountains that I've ticked off for it to properly feel like it's happened. And even then, I still feel a little bit disconnected.
Well, I'm the same. In the family or with our friends, I'm the one that's taking the photos. I take loads of photos. I have lists to be organised. Maybe you were just 21st century before your time, Jacky. Sort of getting the video rather than having the experience. I'm not sure. I take photos, not instead of having the experience. I think because being in the moment, I think can be a rather important thing, because if you can't hold on to a picture, you've got to intensify your experience of what else is happening. So, for example, I did quite a lot of acting as a young person, and really concentrating on where you were in the scene helped me remember my lines, helped me put effort into doing the part well. And I suspect that taking that into life is also rather important for me. But let's talk about learning, because preparing for exams, did you find that hard?
Oh, yes.
Is that a sore point?
Yes, I really struggled. And I know one of the reasons I was very grateful for the advent of computers is it's aided how I learn. So for exams and things, I struggle to remember things, but I also struggled to organise them in my head. And if I only had a tiny bit of scrap paper allowed to me in the exam or something, I felt like I couldn't organise my thoughts, and I certainly didn't really have time to organise my thoughts particularly well in an exam environment. So I used to memorise entire essays to try and regurgitate.
Oh.
And I've met somebody else who also has very little imagery going on in their heads, and they said they did the exact same thing as well. So that's one thing I did. But I'm also aware that the value of computers for me is if I'm doing something that involves material I'm super familiar with, like if I'm trying to plan a lecture or something now on a topic I have a reasonable degree of expertise in, I can kind of start planning that in my head because I'm familiar with it and I can see connections between it and so on. But if I have to, if I'm doing a new qualification or something, I'm learning new things, I have to do a thing that I call, oh, this is gross, but I call it vomit on a page. I have to literally shovel my ideas out in front of me so I can start organizing them outside of my head, because I can't visualize them and do that working out. I have to get it in front of me, be able to actually see it to do that. So that's two of the things that I think are probably directly linked to my aphantasia, is my weird approach to exams and my approach to at least trying to organize new information, especially if there's a lot of it.
I'm wondering if personality comes into this a bit, because you had to get it out and then shape it. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I was a bit different with exams in that I sort of took the line, and it depends a bit on what subject you did. So I did arts. I wasn't really very good at sciences because I couldn't hold on to facts. Didn't have any, photographic memory. So that's at the other end of this spectrum, where you could look at a page and sort of see it again and reproduce it in your head.
So jealous of those people.
I mean, that is, respect everybody out there that can do that, but just bear in mind that Jacky and I cannot even see headlines to remember. So we had to find another way of doing stuff. So what my approach to exams was, you've only got, let's say, 45 minutes to write an answer. So work out what the most likely questions are going to be, work out what the topics are going to be, and have 3, maybe 4 good things to say on each topic. And then go in there and give a really good go at those 3 or 4 things. So my approach was, you can't possibly learn the 750 things about this topic. So go and get the 4 really good things and then be creative in the exam. That's essentially, so from A levels onwards, that's how I tackled it.
I think you're probably right that there's other factors at play here about how we respond to this and enact it, because I do have high levels of anxiety, certainly higher levels than it sounds like you ever experienced. And so to me, the option was, you need to learn everything, just literally learn everything, cover off every base, and then that will be okay. Well, it's not ideal.
Yeah, but it hasn't done you any harm, has it?
Honestly, I think it probably has. I certainly did worse at exams than I did any other kind of type of assessment. And I think you can worry then that reflects how clever you are or your ability, when actually what it reflects, as a lot of people with various issues know, is it arguably only reflects your ability to regurgitate information.
Right. And bear in mind that I could be a huge loss to science because I thought very early on, I dropped biology because I really liked it. I thought, learning a whole load of facts isn't really going to suit me. So I went I did geography instead, those sorts of things, made those choices. So if you lean towards stuff that isn't just about personality, but is also about the way your brain works, so I could articulate ideas, and ideas in the art subjects suited me. So it is a bit to do with I guess the confidence to go and say, what I think about this poem or what I think about this aspect of the Industrial Revolution is important, and I show it's important by writing about it well, was how I tried to get through my education. But one of the things, perhaps, Jacky, the people listening and thinking, well, how do you find out if people think for themselves about whether they've got any aspects of aphantasia? I think there's something called the VVIQ that people can think for about themselves. Could you perhaps get people to consider how they could test themselves?
That example I gave early doors was kind of based on that. I mean, some people just like to pick something very simple. If they're having a chat with friends, for example, so sometimes people just want to pick a very basic thing like an apple and then just compare what they've got in their heads. So thinking about how sharp are the lines on it, how bright and colourful is it? Is it a bit smudgy? Is it a bit grey? Can you rotate that image in your head? With that particular questionnaire, the idea of thinking about people's faces and whether you can actually imagine their gait when they walk and that kind of thing, that's taken off that. And I think we'll provide a link to that to go with this recording, so people can have a little look at some of the items that are in there and the explicit kind of framework for answering, which is basically the degree of clarity with which you can see the different things that's suggested. But it's usually about picking something that's familiar or that most people could visualize, and then just seeing how you go with that. And as you've suggested, you've got absolutely nothing. And when I try and visualize an apple, a family member, it doesn't really matter. I have maybe got the faintest idea of it's more like a feeling that I'm thinking about those things. I can see virtually nothing. I might have a sense vagueness of color, but it kind of feels like it's right on the periphery and I can't look at it, and so there's nothing there. But it is arguably more like a continuum, so there will be these people who are super awesome, amazing, vivid worlds in their heads that just sounds kind of mind-blowing to me. So there will be people at that end of things, but also people in the middle. kind of, well, yeah, I could see some stuff. It's quite nice, thanks, but it's not hyper full of colour and vividness and all that stuff. But they're also not like us with a kind of empty head going, no, nothing there.
Yeah, one of the things that I was advised to do when asking children is to get them to imagine a tractor. Because that's sort of like an everyday thing, that's an imaginative, creative thing. And, even 3 or 4-year-olds know exactly what a tractor is. And not to describe, can you see a red tractor, but say, right, close your eyes, can you imagine a tractor? And I've got 7 grandchildren, and they all could. And say, now, where is it? It's in a field. And what sort of field is it? And what colour's the tractor? And who's driving the tractor? And has the farmer got a hat on? And honestly, it was quite extraordinary how one child was saying, he's got a flat hat on and a checked shirt. I mean, you wouldn't believe how precise this visual imagination was, but they all could have different colours, and it was as real. The creation of the picture was as real. And this is Grandad thinking, I cannot do this. And that was it was lovely that they didn't have that disadvantage, but their visualization abilities were absolutely rock solid. And as I say, out of the 7, pretty well all of them had medium to high visualization abilities, which is strange, isn't it? Okay, I'm wondering, do you think it would be good to move on to think about what the implications for criminal justice might be, Jacky?
I mean, sure, but this obviously is very speculative, and I'm curious to know, if people are listening to this, kind of their take on things as well. But I'm kind of aware that I had some personal kind of concerns, but also it made me start thinking more widely about other people in the criminal justice system and so on. So one of the first things I was very aware of is there's a couple of things happened in my life that have made me worry that I was going to come to serious harm. And looking back on those, I didn't really do much about it in terms of the criminal justice sense. But now I've started reflecting on the aphantasia and so on. Looking back over those incidents, I would be especially concerned about how credible I'd be seen as an eyewitness to those, because my memory of it just doesn't work like a lot of people. And I think if that assumption that everyone thinks the same, we already have false kind of understandings of how eyewitness testimony works and how people's memory work. A lot of people still seem to think they work exactly like video cameras, when actually people's levels of suggestibility and so on are much higher. I'm sure I'm saying things that a lot of people are already aware of anyway. But then if somebody like me comes along and gets asked about detail, I have none. So in the things that happen to me, I have a sense of space, sort of a bit. I have a sense of movement for some of those things, but one of those incidents, I got grabbed from behind. So I have very little sense of it beyond kind of knowing there was a space to this side of me and there was a building to the other side of me. That's kind of all I really had. But I do, even though that particular incident was a long time ago now, I can still remember my decision making. So I still remember the mental checklist I went through of what I might be able to do about this situation. So that to me is very clear, but I couldn't fill in any details. And I also wonder if people started picking me apart if I tried to identify someone. It's that kind of weird thing of, I know if I've met someone before, so I see them again, and I know I've met them before, but I can't describe them. So when I meet a classroom full of new students, for example, and they're all chatting, I will probably remember pretty much everything they've said to me. I will often also remember where they were in the classroom in relation to me, but they have no faces. So I start to have to build up factual profiles about those people to link the things they're saying to. So I really struggle. So if I was needed to be an eyewitness and people say, describe the face, whatever facts I could retain from that incident, I might be able to repeat, but it just wouldn't be the same because I can't conjure up that image in my head to then try and start explaining that to somebody. So I wondered then, would people not take me seriously if I then identified somebody and said, yes, it's that person? Or if under cross-examination, people start picking at the details. I mean, maybe that would be easier. Maybe I could just sit there and go, well, I've no idea because that's not how my brain works. Maybe that is actually a get out that would be useful, but I do worry about how credibly I would be seen. So that's one of my biggies. And obviously this is something that I hope never impacts you, but potentially could. How do you feel about that?
Well, I know, for example, that because I've done some work about learning skills, that visual sequential memory is absolutely vital to spelling. Being able to see things and then put them back in the same order is, a breakdown how lots of people spell. Now, bear in mind that my visual bits are completely non-existent. I'm quite a good speller. So how is that happened when I've got two really severely dyslexic sons? Like, one of them is so dyslexic, he's almost off the scale. So I just know how things are spelled. Now, don't ask me how I just know, but I've sort of found a way of getting that into my head somehow. Maybe it's just because it was so important to me to learn to read, to write. And one of the things that happened, Jacky, was that because I was, for example, in A levels, if there was a word I wasn't confident about spelling, I would come up with another word. So I found I had, big vocabulary, or I would put a subclause in, which would avoid me looking like I couldn't spell. So your challenge was, what sort of a witness would I be? I would probably be quite a good witness because of the experience thing. Because every witness can't paint the picture. They use words in a witness box. And I'm quite good at recreating the experience because I hold loads of information, but not the picture. So I think I'm multi-layered about what's going on. For example, I did a lot of group work as a probation officer, and I was pretty good at knowing the complexity of what was happening in a group. And weirdly, I was quite good at names. I don't know how. I'm putting names to faces. I honestly, genuinely do not know how that happened.
It's interesting that you kind of are, but don't fully understand that. I know I'm awful. I also know I was very awful at spelling, to the point where it perplexed my teachers. Like, how can you be so intelligent and not be able to spell?
Yeah, it's because the problem with teachers is that they teach the way they teach. They don't teach the way children learn. And I mean, in a way, there's a bit of, say you're working with groups in a prison or working as a probation officer, say, finding out about how different people's brains work, or how they see the world around them, or how they experience life is really important before you can think about asking them to change, isn't it? I didn't have a clue about how my brain absorbed information. What I did know is I was pretty good at complexity. So I was always good at complexity. And one of the reasons was that one of my, visualization, being good at seeing, was that I had to interpret that, because I knew obviously my brain was compensating. In fact, I wasn't going to hold any visual information for any time at all. So it sort of, the brain found a way of storing important information another way. Extraordinary. It's quite exciting, really.
It is. I think there's a lot of scope to kind of pick that apart a little bit and get a fuller understanding of just human beings in general. Certainly, you seem to have been quite creative in your ways around this without knowing it. Like, I understand a number of dyslexic people often are. You find a way, hopefully. But it does. it does make me curious. Like when you're talking to somebody who's, you can make very important decisions over their life. If you're a criminal justice practitioner, I worry about sometimes if people don't have much sort of autobiographical detail to their lives, they may look a little evasive, or if they don't have much descriptive detail in a particular event, they may look evasive. And I'm rather glad that I now know, well, that's how I might look, but it's not me being evasive. It is just a genuine thing that I don't have some of that detail.
Yeah, I get that, and there can be mental health reasons for that, but there can also be structural, the way your brain works, reasons for that. And I mean, I think cognitive functioning is something that practitioners need to consider. So, I mean, I'm going to be a bit careful as I say this, but I've already mentioned dyslexia, which is an umbrella term for a whole variety of impacts upon ability to learn or put sequences together. And, there's no single causality. But if you think about the prison population, they reckon that up to a third of the population has some form of impact on their lives because of dyslexia. Now, that is much higher than the general population, isn't it? And you wonder whether there are other forms of cognitive impacts which people working in the system need to be much more aware of, much more, as you say, sensitive. So somebody might be looking really resistant to you simply because they don't understand the concepts you're using, because they don't have the ability to understand the concepts you're using. And maybe whether someone can read or write is a relatively simple thing to assess, but the causality of that is often very complex. So, the implications for criminal justice of cognitive differences is something that, I took really, really seriously before I had children. Ironically, I was running a learning opportunities group in Reading as a very young probation officer, because I knew that people who couldn't read and write, it was affecting everything, their ability to get jobs, their confidence. And then when I had children, my oldest son, was, really, really super intelligent, much higher IQ than I've got. And he was stalled at school when he got to 7. And he learned the reading scheme. He was the first boy to complete the reading scheme, but he just learned it off by heart. He couldn't read. He just learned the reading scheme. So,
my dad used to teach me for reading, used to cover up the pictures because I memorized all the words that went with the pictures.
Right. So can you see how in a way, and it's Alex is the one that's aphasic, Jacky. So can you see how he would have looked up, got the triggers from the pictures and learnt the words at the bottom, and then and fooled us all. So in a way, I suspect that some of the implications are about being way more sophisticated, about thinking about the human being, the other side of the desk. And I think there are issues about, you started about what sort of a witness you could be, but there's also what sort of client is the person the other side of the desk. How is their brain working? How are they seeing the world around them? How are they experiencing the world around them? How are they interpreting it is just as big a question, it seems to me. So if you ask me what sort of witness I would be, I wouldn't start, if someone asked me a question, I wouldn't say to myself, oh, I can see this in my head and I will tell the barrister what I see. I would think of the question and answer the question to the best of my ability by recreating the experience. I wouldn't recreate what I saw. And over the years, I've got really confident that my judgment and my experience and my reading of the emotions and my memory of where I was and what I was doing is good enough to be a valid witness.
So if you said that you perceived a threat because you remember that you did at the time, but you were
Yeah.
asked to evidence that by what you were looking at.
I would say I was walking in this direction. In front of me, I remember, was this, and over that side was the other, and I would recreate the scene from the experience, not from.
So you have sufficient spatial awareness and spatial memory
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you could do that.
yeah, probably because I.
But then you'd be relying maybe factually on, I remember the man was holding a knife. You won't be able to see that, but you've retained that factual information.
I would retain the fact, not the picture.
Mm.
But the other thing, Jacky, I listened to a podcast on the BBC recently, which was because anything I listen to on this is always really interesting because I've not heard it before. And someone who's aphasic doesn't have to work certain things out; they just sort of know. So, which is longer, a squirrel's tail or a rabbit's tail? And I just say squirrel. Whereas someone who's would have to think in their head, well, I compare this and compare the other, have to see the pictures. Well, are the pictures in scale? So just knowing something is weird. I don't know where it comes from, but there is an element that there is a confidence, I think, that comes from not having to rely on pictures. And that's all I can say. So and then I've been an expert witness in courts loads and loads and loads of time, but I've never actually been witness to a crime, Jacky. So if it ever happens to me, I'll let you know whether I get shredded by a barrister.
I was just thinking about the tail thing, because I listened to that BBC production as well, and I have to say I was kind of like, I sort of just know the answer, but I don't like just knowing answers, because I know how fallible human brains are. So I hate just knowing answers. And I tried to pick apart how I would check that I was right. And it was kind of like a feeling like I know I'm thinking about those two tails. I can't see them, but I know I'm thinking about them. And it's more of a feeling of the length of those tails. It's quite hard to convey what I'm kind of doing there, but there is a kind of process in my head where I can check what I think I know, but it's very hard to describe, I think, to other people.
I think you're a frustrated scientist, Jacky. That's what it is. As arts type, just sort of let the emotion go. I know this.
Well, I'm a social scientist, and the way certainly I was taught psychology way back was very positivist, and it was very quantitative methods and all that kind of thing. So I think that probably is still having a lasting effect on me, even though it's one of the reasons I've so thoroughly embraced criminology. Is it's been a big challenge to a lot of the ways I was taught psychology.
In that case, respect. So let's come back to the possible implications for criminal justice, because I'm not sure there's a lot of work being done on this, and so maybe we need to ask questions rather than be too assertive. Do you think that there are any issues about causality in relation to criminality and aphantasia?
I haven't seen anything, as you suggest, specific to the people we might be interested in, the processes we might be interested in. But I am aware there seems to be some things coming through around kind of dampened fear responses, for example. And I wondered if there was maybe some things we should be thinking about maybe possibility of increased risk-taking, that kind of thing, but it's not very clear at the moment. I've also seen some stuff about empathy linked to aphantasia. It's not something that I personally recognised, but there's potentially something there as well. And I did wonder, like I've kind of said, I feel a little disconnected from my life. If you don't feel connected to your life so well, then a lot of the like desistance-based stuff that we might be interested in, that we might think about, and even that kind of idea of, try and think about your future, it's less vivid to try and think about a future that you can maybe attach yourself to, or if you don't have a strong sense of self because don't have those vivid memories of your life so far and what's important, who's important. If that connectedness isn't there, and it's very hard, well, it's harder to build it potentially. I'm not saying everyone feels the same way I do, obviously, but there is some sort of growing evidence that some of those things might be an issue. Then obviously for some of the people we may work with as practitioners, maybe some of those things are going to have an impact on how we try to work with them. It broke my heart when I started thinking about the importance of photography to me. It broke my heart when I thought about people who went to prison without thinking about sort of knowing they were going to go. And maybe they get there and your first night in cell and you can't conjure up any reassuring, relaxing images. You can't conjure up faces of your family members to try and have that connection. That must magnify any feeling of isolation if you don't have any like hard photographs to be looking at. Now, I appreciate like having hard photographs can be quite upsetting in a different way, but it must feel as that door closes, if you can't conjure up some of those connections in your head, as soon as you get off a phone to someone, as soon as you can't see them, there is arguably that magnified disconnect. And I don't know if that is true of people, but it felt very painful to me to kind of think that that might be the case. And obviously some of the other things we've talked about would apply, like, oh, how do you mentally relax if you're locked up with very few things around you? Oh, think of a lovely scene on a beach. No, I can't count the sheep. I can't do any of those things. So you might be able to teach them or learn some other things like progressive muscle relaxation and that kind of thing. But your head, and especially for somebody like me, so I have an overactive inner voice and I have nothing to distract myself from my overactive inner voice, which is very naggy, not very supportive and helpful sometimes. I can't then remove myself with a lovely scene on the beach. And I do think that there is arguably a higher level potentially of mental punishment when we're talking about people who are potentially in prison, but then some of these implications for how we might help them to manage that, how we might help them to think about a life that is different, how we might help them to kind of work towards that. So we're asking them to maybe work towards something they can articulate but not really see. We might be asking them to kind of build those social bonds, but they'd be social bonds with people that you can't imagine when you're not around. I wonder how strong all that stuff would be.
Yeah. And so in a way, particularly if you're being cut off, say, for example, by prison or by conditions attached to a probation order or something, connectedness might be particularly difficult if you can't imagine or visualize. The other thing that I wanted to just explore with you is how this sort of problem could be masked by another label. Because I think, for example, ADHD, attention deficit, it might just be that someone can't visualize. In other words, it could be that certain easier or better known issues, like being on the autism spectrum, could get lost in that. Well, this person's brain just doesn't work the way that you expect it to. So I'm not saying I'm anxious to challenge people who are in the criminal justice world, whether they're say probation officers or prison officers or forensic psychologists, just to be aware of this possible other layer of complexity. And there are quite simple additional tests you can do. If people like us get through a significant slice of our lives before we find out about it. And is it 2015 was the first time that this condition was even labeled? Although I think there was a 19th century guy.
There were discussions, but the label came, yes, in 2015, as far as I understand it.
So, and I think it's the most beautiful phrase, your mind's eye. And of course, everybody seems to understand that, except me. I just thought it was a lovely metaphor.
I still catch myself using the language of visualizing. So I said, I'm just visualizing myself doing it. And I think I'm not, and now I'm aware I'm not visualizing myself doing that at all.
Yeah. Well, one of my friends whose father was a professor of philosophy, one of their best family jokes was, "I see," said the blind man. And they all round their family table over a meal fell about laughing when anybody said, "Oh, I see," said the blind man. And they thought this was the biggest joke ever. So I joined in the laughter. But of course, the pun on "I understand," but they were seeing it with another layer, which is that I see in my visualization head as well. So they were getting another layer of joke. So, I got there 65 years later. I'm thinking, are there any issues about interventions that we need to consider in the criminal justice field? Whether, because you talked about some people feel quite angry when they find out that maybe they've missed out. Do you think some of our clients or people that we're working with might feel a bit cheesed off if they find out that they've got this?
Oh, and that was quite a personal reaction, me feeling a little bit like a sense of loss and so on. I think consider levels of frustration. Like I can imagine if you're trying to do group work and you're, for example, trying to encourage some of the relaxation techniques or some mindfulness stuff. One, it might kind of undermine the credibility of the people trying to teach it, I suppose, because you kind of just sat there going, why are you teaching me these things that I can't do? This, and why is everyone else doing it? This is weird. They must all just be pretending. Or you get frustrated because you do believe the other people can do it, but you can't, and you don't understand why or why it isn't helping you. So I wonder if that kind of greater awareness of just general diversity and actually listening and trying to help people articulate what they're sort of experiencing, because it's quite difficult unless you've got the language to explain what you're experiencing. It's very difficult to explain it. So if you're a person who, like I've talked about spatial memory and that kind of thing, if you don't have that vocabulary to explain this, it's quite difficult to articulate your point of view. If you don't know the word aphantasia and aren't aware it's a thing, it's quite, you don't even know there's something to articulate, let alone how to articulate it. So I rather like having these conversations because it kind of, I hope, helps equip people to maybe just challenge themselves a little bit and to rethink the world a little bit and maybe be aware that we are still busy making assumptions, sometimes even the best of us, but also to potentially help equip people to explain their own experiences so that we can better share them. But I'm also aware, certainly when I was thinking through the things that had happened to me previously, the incident where I got grabbed from behind, because I had so little in my head about that, it was I couldn't, even at the time, I couldn't properly see the person who grabbed me because they were behind me. I had very little apart from this vague spatial memory, this vague the more concrete memory of what I went through in my thinking steps. But I'm also aware that when other stuff has happened to me, I have re-experienced them later on, so more like a trauma symptom. But it was very much the sense of movement coming towards me. Now, I think I've been spared some full trauma responses because I don't get a visual flashback. But I do get the sense of movement towards me and the slight feeling of panic. And what I found was, although it wasn't overwhelming, I couldn't do anything with it. So if we are potentially asking somebody to visually restructure, rescript something, I'm assuming there's probably going to be implications for that, because certainly it's not something I can do. So I kind of kept having this sense of movement coming rapidly towards me and a sense of panic, but I didn't feel I could I could process that anymore. I found it very difficult. I'm aware some interventions for trauma I know people have been talking about this. I don't know if it's been fully resolved, but they involve you visualizing. And some of the eye movement interventions are based around you visualizing the trauma as it happened to you. I think people are talking about other ways of making that work, but I'm not sure how effective they're saying they're going to be. And I would also just be aware that some things like mindfulness and even some of the basic apps for mindfulness, they kind of say visualize your thoughts moving away like buses. All those kind of things feel like they're cut off from me for processing trauma, for processing anything really. So I'm speculating. I am aware there's a growing evidence base that kind of suggests that at least some of those things probably are worth thinking about a little bit more. But it does trouble me, and I wonder if it would, if some helpful practitioner is trying to suggest some of these things to people, if they're just going to feel like failures, they'll feel frustrated, or they'll just look at their practitioner like, you idiot, what on earth are you talking about? And just going, this person knows nothing.
So it's going back to the idea that if a teacher is teaching a dyslexic child the way she or he teaches an ordinary child, then they're not going to get anywhere. You have to teach the way a child learns. And in a way, group workers or forensic psychologists or people working with people who have offending issues, you've got to make sure you're hitting the right notes with the person on the other side of the table or in the group. Okay, I'm wondering if we should try to move into whether there are any positives about this, because I'm gonna start off by saying a positive for me. People perhaps will recall that I've done quite a lot of heavy end work with public protection, and I had to look at some really, really awful files to do with sex offending and the extreme ends of violence and things. And I can say I'm not haunted by those images because I don't remember them, can't see them. So there are, that's an advantage I had in being the head of public protection, is that I can't see those images. So that's a positive.
It's one I recognise. So obviously I've read a lot of horrific accounts of harmful behaviour, and I often remember the words, but I've never ever created a visual version of that. I've also looked at autopsy photos and crime scene photos, and again, they don't stay with me. I might be haunted by a description of somebody's emotional reaction or something that may stay with me a little bit more. But absolutely, I'm with you on that as a positive potentially. And I guess that's why some people may be concerned it might be linked to empathy, but I don't feel that it has particularly hampered my empathy. I've always tried to pay attention in a moment. I've always tried to ask questions and listen to other people. So I don't feel like it's hampered me necessarily in that regard either. Well, so I'm seeing that as a positive.
Yeah, and also I remember you saying to me in another conversation, Jacky, about you felt it helped you live in the moment better, and that made me think, because I knew I wasn't ever going to take a picture away. I was looking and thinking and trying to feel what was happening. So maybe I was trying to absorb more than just to take a snapshot and get a picture. So I think I was probably trying to operate on more levels than just get a picture. So maybe I'm wondering about living in the moment meant I was trying harder subconsciously to get in tune with the moment through things other than just seeing it.
That's lovely to hear, because I have to say, I need to slightly correct you. I actually really struggle to live in the moment.
right. Well, that's my oral memory.
Sorry about.
My oral memory completely letting me down. Rats.
Well, it's something I'm actively working on along the
Oh, I
lines you're
see.
talking about. Because I went, so I've always struggled with it, particularly because my overactive inner voice distracts me a lot, and so on. It isn't very restful or peaceful. But also, when I first started thinking about this, I went through a little bit of a phase where I just went, there's no point in immersing myself in this moment, certainly with a beautiful scene, for example, because I won't remember it. Or at least I've got the photos, so that's as much as I'm going to remember it. I think it's a little bit different when you are interacting with actual human beings rather than a beautiful scene.
Oh.
That's maybe a little bit different, but it's certainly something I've been trying to work on, is being more present and trying to enjoy, the actual lived moment a lot better, because I'm aware it's something I'm very bad at. I am also aware potentially a benefit of this, although I've sort of expressed a feeling of loss, knowing that all other people have this big, rich world that I don't appear to be able to participate in, is the idea that I can also see it as potentially being a bit overwhelming or distracting. I don't know. It's quite weird trying to imagine having that imagery, and it sounds wonderful. I'm kind of sort of understanding it as this immersive, amazing thing, or wonderful recollections of a moment that you really liked, although potentially also of moments that you really did not like. But I can also imagine that might, even in a positive sense, some of that stuff might be quite distracting or overwhelming, or feel cluttered, at least relative to what's going on in my head at the moment.
Well, it's interesting you talked about the inner voice, because I also have this sort of running commentary going on 100% of the time. And it may be that the brain sort of gives a primacy to different sorts of source of thought and recollection and reflection.
I understand some people have no visual imagery in their head. They have no sort of clear inner voice, and I find that in particular difficult to try and perspective take with.
Right, we're all different. So on that note, let's move on to thinking about, well, what next? So we've attempted this conversation. I think we've been quite exposing of something that lots of people know nothing about. So to keep the conversation going, we want to say that there may well be, both in the UK and internationally, because INCJ wants to reach out across boundaries, and across language boundaries and cultural boundaries. We've got the feeling there may be pockets of knowledge and experience elsewhere that would be really good to connect about aphantasia, because it can't just be the two of us operating in criminal justice that have this experience, and would be really interested in finding out what's going on and if there's anybody else thinking about this. And we'd be very happy to use INCJ and, drop us a line. So just as I wrote an email to someone I'd never met or heard of, this person called Jacky Burrows, and we've got in touch, and we've caused each other quite a lot of merriment to find out how similar and different we are. We haven't yet taken to exchanging photographs of different experiences, but my guess is that WhatsApp will start happening. That'll start happening on WhatsApp to see if our photos are similar. But perhaps if you'd like to get in touch with us through INCJ and our chat line, that would be really good, because maybe in a couple of months or a few months, we could have an open forum like this, particularly looking at whether there are implications for this sort of cognitive exploration for practice and thinking about how we tackle criminality and how we work together and think together in that way. So that's something about what next. Jacky, do you want to say if there are any take-home messages?
Yeah, I mean, part of one of the things I'm very concerned about is that if criminal justice practitioners are engaging with this, depending what part of the world you're in, potentially, you may be going, well, that's interesting, but thank you so much for bringing another thing to my attention that I'm supposed to kind of be thinking about in my practice. Thank you so much for that. I'm barely managing my own caseload. So I'm kind of aware that may be a bit of a thing. But I guess overall, my main thing is I'm constantly fascinated. I love being surprised by the new things that we find out about the world and about human beings and how they function. So even if, you kind of, I can't really do a lot with this at the moment. I love being reminded that we should always try and avoid assumption. I like being reminded that curiosity is worthwhile. And although I'm still kind of actively trying to find some more positives to my aphantasia, other than the fact it's made me feel a bit special, maybe, there probably are some, and we're going to see more of those things emerging. Just that idea of generally valuing diversity. So for me, the most important bit of this is, here's a thing that maybe we can have some concrete, meaningful exchanges about, ask questions, maybe start providing answers for. But just that overall idea of be curious, listen to other people, swap stories, try and avoid assuming that just because your brain works a certain way that somebody else's does, and maybe, trying to actively find the benefits and the excitement and the interest of people's different brains. I guess that's the main thing I want to think about, and it's arguably maybe a bit more approachable for a lot of people who are under duress with their caseloads and things at the moment. But we are going to provide some resources, aren't we? So maybe a mixture of academic stuff, less academic stuff you have to read, stuff you don't have to read. You can just sit and quietly watch, maybe. So hopefully some people will find a moment to engage with some of those if they're interested. I love talking about this stuff, so I'm happy to hear about other people's experiences, their own things they've been thinking about, things that might concern them about how they interact with others. Any of those things I'm interested in. And we will obviously include a link to that test that we've been talking about as well. So you could, if you wanted to, have a little reflect about yourself and where you seem to sit relative to other people as well. But I just want to kind of reiterate that message of being curious, enjoying the world, and I will be very happy to talk to other people about this particular thing, or indeed many other things if wanted. That's what I would like people to take away from this.
Thanks a lot, Jacky. So if you think that this condition, if that's the right word, wasn't even given a name until 215, and I suppose we can all ask, well, what's been missed or what's been misunderstood about how we think or the decisions that have been made. It's good to be curious and to ask questions. And so it's now time for us both to sign off. So thanks very much for listening. Please stay safe and hope you can join us next time. So it's goodbye from Jacky and me, and thank you for listening. Podcasts from INCJ are available on your normal provider through iTunes and Google, for example, under INCJ Podcasts. Thank you very much and goodbye. You have been listening to the INCJ podcast, Conversations about International Criminal Justice. To find out more, go to our website at criminaljusticenetwork.net or follow us on Twitter at INTCJ Network.